time of year when South Africans are making their way to holiday destinations, if they're lucky enough to do so. But at the back of many minds will be the niggle about just how safe they'll be depending on where they're going. And unfortunately, criminals don't always take a break over December, and that's a threat to the tourism industry especially. For more on this, I'm joined by the CEO of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, Chifiwe Chivengwa. Chifiwe, thank you so much for coming in this Sunday morning. Other businesses are looking forward to a break, but of course for the tourism industry, this is the time when you are at your busiest. Now, news coming through from the Department of Tourism that they've signed an MOU with the SAPS and law enforcement for an official safety plan to eventually be put out. The response to that news by the Tourism Business Council?
Well, indeed, that's correct. There is an MOU that's signed between the SAPS and the Department of Tourism, and of course us as the private sector who delivers on tourism. We were present at a press briefing in Pretoria, and we welcome the news that the police are working with the Department of Tourism and together with ourselves as a private sector to really look at the areas where we've had issues in the past and to really come up with solutions. And there are various solutions that have already been put in place and they are running. So we welcome the news, and there are many countries around the world that have units that are dedicated to tourism because tourism is that important to the economy. So we do welcome this news, and we think that is great for tourism, and we should continue to make sure that the destination is safe for tourists that come into the country and also for South Africans traveling across the country.
Now, what is the latest research or surveys telling you about how tourists who visit or are thinking of visiting South Africa, how they feel about the crime situation here? Because anecdotally, when you speak to foreigners who come and visit, or even just South Africans who travel around, perhaps Cape Townians who come to Joburg, then you'll hear them say, we've heard such bad things about crime in Joburg, but it's actually not that bad. Or visitors from overseas saying, I've got friends who said I shouldn't go because the crime rate is so high, but we've actually had a wonderful time in Port Elizabeth or Durban. So there's that anecdotal evidence that the headlines perhaps is not being reflected in their experiences. But what is your research telling you about how visitors and tourists feel?
So one of the biggest thing, or one of the biggest barriers to people coming to South Africa when research is conducted, by various research companies under South African tourism, is the issue of safety and security. It becomes, top. And, I must say that there are many people who come to this country, many people, who come and leave without any criminal, activity, touching them. But when you have one tourist, who, gets involved in, some criminal elements, it's one too many. And it's the same as for South Africa, and it's
Absolutely.
One too many. But, the message starts to cross, to spread across the world, and we are perceived as the country that's not so safe. And when that message, spread across the world, people start to say, well, should I be considering going to South Africa, or should I go somewhere else? What we can do as an industry, together, public and private sector, is to put together measures that will mitigate, the situations, around safety and security. For example, we are putting, proactive measures to say, we don't want crime to happen in specific areas that we have identified, as we call them hotspots, to say we need to have a preventative measure. But should something happen, how do we respond to when something happens? We're putting a measure for that. And if something did happen, how do we make sure that we've got aftercare? To make sure that, if there's a trauma that people have experienced, how do we deal with trauma? How do we get professionals to deal with that? How do we assist the tourists, to get their passports? And how do we assist them, to return home safely? More importantly, how do we make sure that, the perpetrators, when they are caught, they can't just be left alone because the person that they've committed the crime to has left the country. So we are figuring out all these things, and we have implemented many of these measures. But we want to ensure that, when tourists are in the country, when people are considering coming to South Africa, when South Africans are considering traveling across South Africa, they are sure that, they can go and have a good time. Tourism is about, people spend their money, they work for the whole year, they want to spend their money safely, they want to enjoy their money, they want to have new experiences. So we must make sure that people are enriched with those new experiences in a safe environment.
So those 3 points are prevention, the proper response, and then aftercares, the basic 3 points that they're building the safety plan around. Now, I've just come back from Cape Town, where we're covering a story there where they're expecting a spike in gang-related activities because of 2 high-profile gang members who was shot down. And I made the point yesterday, broadcasting from there, that just a few kilometers down the road, you've got the International Cape Town Stadium, where you've got this huge Cape Town Sevens happening. It's the beginning of their season. Now, many South Africans will look at this list and say, prevent, response, aftercare. Gosh, we'd like some of that because we're living here every day. We're not just visiting. How difficult is it to navigate that narrative about saying we want to make it safe for tourists, but actually we also are aware that this is a place where South Africans live every day, and their realities are even more important, but also reflected on in the experience of visitors coming in.
Yeah, it is a difficult space to navigate, of course. You know, crime, you know, affects everyone who lives in the country. And we all know, you know, how it has changed the way we live every day. But for us, from the tourism point of view, you know, just the same way as other people from the banking and many other sectors, you know, have strategies to really deal with that sector-specific, you know, criminal elements. And that's what we're doing here, is to look at the sector-specific elements and say, how do we mitigate those things? And we do know that when we do this kind of work, it will spill over to communities, because those people that are, you know, terrorizing, you know, the tourists, you know, they are terrorizing communities as well. So if we do our job from the sector-specific, it will spill over to the communities. But of course, we're working with the police when we do this. We're not doing this in isolation. The police have committed to this. They are putting more resources into this to make sure that, you know, they really deal with the issues of crime. And, you know, the tourist element is just but small element. And we do believe that, you know, they're dealing with community issues at large and make sure that, you know, crime is prevented and there's response and there's also aftercare. So for us is to look at the sector-specific solutions that will make sure that the sector thrives and we can create more jobs. Indeed. And when we create more jobs, people within those communities become part of tourism value chain and crime will go down. And they feel like they do not have to turn to a life of crime merely to put bread on the table. Thank you so much. We wish you all the best with the safety plan going forward. That is the CEO of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, Chifiwa Chivengwa. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and we wish you and the rest of your industry all the best over this busy tourism season.